Hello there, my friend. Welcome to another episode of the Chasing Poker Greatness podcast. As always, this is your host, the founder of ChasingPokerGreatness.com, Coach Brad Wilson. I forgot my name there for a moment. Today's Friday, which is a philosophical day. I'm joined by Duncan Palamourdas. Duncan, what is happening, sir?
I'm doing really well. How's life with you? How's everything?
Life's going. It keeps on going one day at a time. Cool. Let's wrap it up. That's good talk.
No, that's
Actually,
exactly right.
it segues quite nicely into today's theme of quitting. And could you describe for the listener what you mean by quitting and what exactly it is that we're going to dive into today?
For sure. Yeah. So just a little bit of a background as always. In one of our earliest podcasts, we talked about the idea of quitting and how it is a very complex subject. And sometimes quitting has a negative connotation, but it can be used as a positive tool. So one of the very first things that we can start with is, first of all, what is quitting and how we can define it? And like with everything else, has a lot of definitions, but I guess in most people's minds, quitting is the idea of essentially stopping a typical action that typically you're doing for a considerable amount of time, right? But it doesn't have to be for a considerable amount of time, but it's basically the interruption of an otherwise long-going sequence of events which are related to one another. That's one way, or just basically stopping doing something that you've been doing.
Right. And for an undetermined amount of time.
In general, correct, exactly. And I guess one of the questions we started exploring back in that podcast, and we can be a little bit more nuanced about, is quitting inherently bad or inherently good? And because I'm sort of like guessing what your answer is going to be, if not, is it more of one than the other? So make the question a little bit harder.
Well, if it's inherently bad, then I think we're all in for some trouble here, because at some point I think we all quit living, which means that we're all going to be doing some bad things for a very long time
Right.
in the grand scheme of things eventually. So I don't think quitting is inherently a bad thing. I do think that it could be problematic as it relates to poker in some situations. For instance, someone who aspires to be a poker professional, if they're constantly quitting for one reason or another, whether it be they're up two buy-ins and they just snap quit, or they lose a buy-in and they snap quit, when it's affecting your ability to go to work, put in volume, play hours, then I would say that quitting could be problematic. And I think that, like, on the flip side of that, not quitting can also be problematic as well if things are, you're not in the right state of mind, you're actually burned out, you need a break, you're feeling overwhelmed. So, yeah, I think either one could potentially be problematic.
I agree with you. Do you think it tends to be one versus the other more often in your personal experience? Do you think typically quitting is more bad than it is good, or you don't have
I
evidence
would
to
say
support that?
quitting more good than bad
More
in
good
my
than bad.
in
Okay.
my life experience. There are
Okay.
many things that I wish I would have quit way sooner than I actually did quit them, and many things that have given me great relief when I
Hmm.
did quit them. So, like, quitting to me means turning the page, or recognizing that a thing is not providing satisfaction or joy or whatever it is in my life in this specific moment, and taking an action to do something else, which to me feels like a good thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, because I guess you're bringing a very important point. Um, every time we quit something, a space becomes available in our life, right? I mean, time space, location space, like there is room. And the question is, what do we typically replace that missing part with? That's a real question. Like, you quitting in favor of what? That is a real question, right? So, for example, to give the example of fitness that we used a couple of times in the past, if somebody is quitting a day at the gym because the alternative is to, let's say, go and eat unhealthy, that is not necessarily a good quit. But if you're quitting because your body took enough and you want to get rest and then instead continue the next day stronger than ever, that is a better way of using your time, because you're saying, because I need the rest for my body to recover whatever damage it has suffered, and then go back a little bit later stronger. So what are we replacing it with is a big factor of whether quitting is good or bad.
And I would say, like, there's a lot of utility in replacing it with nothing
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of situations too. I've
Mm-hmm.
coached a lot of poker players who have dealt with burnout because they just play way too much poker. They're not enjoying it. They're getting frustrated very easily. And the reality is, like, they need to rest. They need
Mm-hmm.
to get away from the game for a week. That they don't need to study every day. They don't need to watch training videos. They don't need coaching sessions. They just need to do nothing poker related for a specific amount of time, so that you're actively resting and re-energizing. And I think that, like, some of the best days of my life are when I just unplug from business,
Absolutely.
podcasting, coaching, Slack, technology, and I just rest. Whether that's, going to the pool and just laying there, going swimming, going on a walk, or just laying on my couch or meditating and spending time with, my wife, the kids, the cats, like all of that stuff, to me has lots of value and utility.
Right. Or even playing PoE.
Yes, or play PoE.
No,
I'm
no,
I'm still I'm still scared of PoE,
no.
so I don't approach it.
I know, but let me. I think what you're saying is incredibly important, and at the same time, for the listener, it is important to also know who you're talking to. Like, fundamentally, you are what people would call an overachiever, a highly successful individual who keeps pushing themselves to the limit. So quitting can actually have a beneficial aspect to it, because otherwise you're like an unstoppable force, right? So it really does matter who you're giving the advice to, right? A person.
Wait,
No,
so I don't want to be an unstoppable force? Is that what?
what I'm saying is that if you use that unstoppable force in any direction, you may start crushing in different places. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
that car needs to stop from time to time, right? To make sure that the direction is correct, because it goes so fast, right? Like, you just have to make sure that you're moving in the right direction. So sometimes I have to stop, otherwise I may reach 100 miles away from my destination, whatever it might be. So
for sure.
quitting can be beneficial to you. Like, but I would also say that tying to the ideas of first Nietzsche, then Taleb, and then later Kelly Clarkson, the idea that sometimes we have to push ourselves to the limits in order to become stronger, right? The idea that by not quitting in a certain situation where your body tells you, what, you can't take it anymore, you cannot do that extra rep, by pushing that extra rep, or just by working the extra hour at the poker table, or by working outside of our comfort zone for a little while, our body ever so slightly gets more used to that uncomfortable situation. So I guess my point is, heuristically, go for the quitting that is the most uncomfortable, not the quitting that is the comfortable. So if you're the typical person who actually likes to quit, try to not to. But if you're the person who doesn't like to quit, an unstoppable force, try to take a break from time to time. Like, try.
Yeah, if you want to systemize it,
Right.
I would say the way to systemize it is to, in the words of one of my good friends, Adam Creek, find your limits, right?
Right.
Set aside a day for whatever it is that you're doing and go at it as hard as you possibly can until you reach failure, right? Like, when you find your limits, you start understanding what it is that you're capable of. And I think for people that quit too early, they don't realize their full potential because they don't know what they're capable of. And if they knew or had a better idea about what they were capable of, they would recognize that, oh yeah, I'm quitting too early, right? I'm not
Right.
reaching failure point. I'm just feeling uncomfortable.
Right.
And you're absolutely right. You do have to push through that feeling of uncomfortability, because that's where growth lies in general.
That's exactly right. And people, it's very easy to rationalize and say, oh, I reached my limits, even though it's just discomfort, right? Even though it's just the feeling that you're starting to get to the point where growth can happen.
Absolutely. So, like, you don't want to burn out. You want to be able to recover, and you want to give yourself the latitude to quit, but you also, have to set some parameters where you know what your limits are, how closely, you're approaching them, so that you can make a more informed decision.
Mhm.
Because if not, you just never really fully realize your full potential.
Very, 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 very well said. And that actually brings us perfectly to the next question, which is, what is the best time to quit in general? Like some of the things that you said start us off really nicely there. And what are some considerations to make the decision, both generally and as that pertains to poker? What are some good times to quit for different individuals?
So I guess as it relates to poker, um, what a tough question,
It
right?
is very difficult. Yes.
A lot of it is like internal. We have the external cues are pretty apparent, right? You're too sleepy to
Mm-hmm.
perform at a level that you're comfortable with. You're too tired. You've played for too long. It's too early in the morning. Whatever those things are, and then the other ones are like you've played a session for some determined period, 3 or 4 hours. Everything's going poorly. You're stuck 5 buy-ins, and you want to quit, right? You just feel like quitting, or maybe you've had like an emotional roller coaster and you're still around break even after 4 hours, where like you were winning 3 buy-ins and then you gave it back and now you're just disgusted and want to quit and leave, right? I think those last two, in my opinion, are opportunities for growth more so than quitting because you're actively tired. I think that pushing through, and again, like pressing and trying to find your limits is a good thing, as long as you haven't reached your threshold of misery and losing, and you torch off your whole bankroll in your session, right? There has to be some fine line there where the downside far outweighs the upside. But I would say, like, in the situation where you're winning 4 buy-ins, you give it back and now you're break even and you feel miserable and you don't want to play anymore, you want to go home, I would say, like, sit with that emotion, sit with that feeling, and then see if you can recover and put in more volume where you don't have to call it a day. I just really like looking at those opportunities, or looking at those situations as opportunities to grow.
Absolutely, absolutely. And to your point, how one can use that as an opportunity to grow. Again, we can use a meta approach, right? I mean, you can quit in the moment, but not meta quit or meta give up, right? I mean, you said it perfectly. Like, let's say you have a really bad session, and that bad session, it ends however it ends. You either quit or you don't quit. It's irrelevant, right? I mean, the point is how we can make it better in the future. So you go back and you reflect. Now you sleep on it, you wake up the next day, and you have some thoughts. We all had those thoughts, right? What are those thoughts? Did you think you stayed there correctly? Or what does the gut feeling tell you? Does it tell you I should have left? Now I feel so much better. I could go and play today, but because yesterday I played for so many hours, I'm so tired today. What does your body tell you? And then you can use that as a way to improve next time. So you can use that as a data point, as Brad usually calls it, right? I mean, you take that extra data point. A data point doesn't have to be a hand in poker. It can actually be a session itself, right? I mean, a metadata point, right? And then you can use that for your next session. You can say, listen, I mean, I don't perform very well, so I'm going to create an artificial, quitting. And all of these artificial quitting circumstances can be anywhere. It can be, it can be stop losses. Some people prefer them, some people don't. It depends on the individual. It can be, hours, how many hours you play. It can be personal stamina, fatigue, thirst, hunger, whatever it is, all these personal needs. And then once you cross those thresholds, you can start creating some rules that work for you.
For sure.
Yeah.
Agree 100%.
Yeah. I would say the dangerous thing would be with all of those things is that, especially for people who have a talent, for people who are onto something, the dangerous thing would be, I'm done with poker. I don't want to do this again. We all probably had those moments. I don't know, like, Brad, how many times, I know I had to count the times, how many times, that thought crossed your mind? And then you say, no, you're just crazy. Like the negative emotion of, yeah, had
like
enough.
1 or 2 million times.
Exactly right. Yeah, so it's not that thought doesn't exist, right? But I mean, that's the wrong type of quitting, right? I mean, that's the same quitting that you again, you go to
Unless you
the
hate it, right? Like,
right,
unless it's, like, not providing any value and it's a negative experience, in which case quitting in that situation would have a lot of utility. Maybe it's just is
right.
adding a lot of strife and conflict and, negative emotions into your life, in which case, maybe you should quit playing poker.
Good point. And what are some of the signs that people can see to decide for themselves? Because this is a very highly subjective topic. So what are
Sure.
some things that can people see and say, you know what, maybe this is not the life for me?
I mean, ask a significant other how you are at the end of poker sessions, right? Are you
Right.
miserable to be around? Do you act like, are you in the worst moods? I mean, how is it affecting your personal life, right? Like, how are you feeling when you're sitting there playing poker, right? Is it miserable? Does it feel like you're, being marched to the poker table at gunpoint every single day and sitting down against your will? Are you less interested in playing poker when you're at the table and more interested in watching Netflix, right?
Right.
These are all kind of cues and data points that are telling you, hey, maybe this isn't the right thing for you to be doing right now.
Right. And to add to that, incidentally, asking somebody who's really close to you, it's an excellent advice, right? Having somebody who can be more objective about how you look and feel, especially if they know you well, is excellent. Whether it's a family member, your spouse, a friend, even your kids, that is actually very relevant. The only thing I'm going to add is that to avoid falling for the trap of the proximity principle, which is basically the idea that we tend to magnify things that have happened to us either very close to us spatially or temporally. Like the thing that happened to us just now is far more important than something that happened 10 years ago. Even that thing that may happen 10 years ago could be the most significant event of our lives, like getting married or something like the birth of our child. But because whatever tragedy or great event happens right now takes more mental space in the now, which what matters. So to avoid falling for the proximity principle issue, so to think that this terrible session you had is all you have all the time in poker, or this amazing session you just had is all that happens all the time in poker, so to avoid falling for that trap, it may be useful to keep a record, right? So if you had a terrible session, write it down. Terrible session. I feel like you actually put whatever you want there. I feel like crap, right? And then the next day, oh my God, I feel like $1,000,000, like all the bluffs worked, all the things that I did work. And write that, and then go back to this and refer to it and see objectively whether or not, the miserable days overweigh the, fun days.
Yeah.
And then see, like, have a more objective approach to it.
Yeah. CPG Philosophical Friday Journal dropping Q4 2024.
Actually, you know what? That would be a good idea. Like writing, right? People have been advocating. I mean, people are writing books about writing things down, and it's just such a simple idea. It's essentially we're telling our brain, you don't have to worry about this anymore because a machine does from now on, right? So
Well,
writing,
right. And you're also capturing how you feel in the moment, which is quite important, right? Because that's going to change from moment to moment.
right?
Jason Su talks a lot about how having a stop loss when you're away from the poker table is one thing, but when you're in it, feeling the
Yes,
emotions, the ups and downs,
right.
it's a much different thing having this protocol where it's mandatory that you step away, right?
Right.
It's much harder to adhere to that in the moment than it is the further away you are from the poker session.
Excellent.
Um, I lost my train of thought there, but I was going somewhere else. And could you, where did I start?
No, I think what you just said made absolute sense to me. I don't know if you had something else to talk
Oh,
about.
yes, 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 yes. I did. So I was talking about like capturing things like in the moment, how you feel. And one thing
Oh,
that I do with in the Wolf program is during onboarding, I use a model of reflective practice, and I used this a while ago when I was my brand was Enhance Your Edge, where people opted in to the newsletter and they got this model of reflective practice for reviewing their own hand histories. And basically, the way that it works is it's a self learning based on filling out a form. And in
mhm.
this case, the wolves are studying a specific spot, a specific report that we've compiled and given them. And then they're reflecting on that process of learning, right? Well, how was the experience? What was it like? What are you thinking and feeling? What would you do better next time? You can just Google model for reflective practice and click on the Wikipedia entry that shows up first to get a good idea of what I'm talking about here. But going through this process regularly in this situation after a poker session, I think has immense value. because it kind of shows you, gives you a record of how you were feeling directly following this event, which is very beneficial to you in the future when you look back on all of these things. You start seeing this pattern emerge of like, wow, at the end of sessions, my emotions tend to be really, really high. I tend to either be really happy or really sad. And then, like, the following day, those emotions kind of dissipate, right? So you can kind of recognize that, like, even though you may have the worst session of your life and you can't win anything and it was terrible and awful, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, right? You typically feel better the next day.
Right.
Um, so I think there's immense value in keeping a record, reflecting on your experiences, taking the lessons that you learn, and then going back and looking at those experiences over an extended period of time.
Exactly. And you can actually account for that as well. Like, if you know that the emotions are high, for example, like you described, perhaps it's not the best practice for you to have a meeting with somebody after a poker session, right? Or whatever it is, however you structure your life, it may make sense that, like you can account for that consequence, whatever it might be, right? You can schedule accordingly. You can sleep it off, or do not make any important decisions. Or, that they say that the best poker spouse is the one that when you go back from a session, is the one that says nothing, right? Like you never ask a poker player, how did your session go, right? So, and this is the most happy marriages, people know not to ask some questions. And if a poker player wants to talk about it, they will, trust me. So.
And if they go to their bedroom, turn the lights off, and bury themselves underneath the covers, you can discern that it did not go well.
Exactly right. But it will probably feel better the next day. But it might not. Like, there is a point. That's another turning point too. If you've noticed a pattern where it used to not bother you, but then all of a sudden, that feeling doesn't go away the next day and the day after that, maybe it's time for a change. Maybe
Well,
that could be.
for sure, and it could also be just you recognizing or being able to put some protocol in place of like, this is beyond my limit, right? This is too much. I should have quit earlier because now it's affecting my ability to play in the near future. Therefore, I need to do better about avoiding this type of situation because it does cost me money in the long run if you're a poker professional.
Very good. Very good. And that reminds me, by the way, it reminds me another important question. Now that you've laid out the foundation of, what are some good practices to get to the proper quitting time? So in other words, what are some ways to become a better quitter, both for the positive and also by avoiding bad quitting? So how can poker players who master that, the proper quitting, how can they use quitting as a tool to be able to send their games to the next level, to elevate their games to the next level?
Well, haven't we answered that really?
What I mean is, what are some things that like somebody who has mastered proper quitting, what can they expect to see in terms of growth specifically? Of course, the bottom line, but what are some things that they can expect to see? Like, less tilting, for example, or better sleeping, or better scheduling, just to put it to words, to articulate it, perhaps.
Well, I think also a more peaceful sense of ending a session where you're not really questioning or second guessing, right? You just know that like now is the time and I'm going to cut it short without ruminating on like, did I leave a really good game? Did I quit too early? Am I leaving money on the table? Should I have played another 5 hours? Am I actually being a professional? All of these questions, you can just have peace with ending your session and knowing that like, yeah, this is the optimal decision that I could make in this moment because I have the data and this is just it, right? It's like
Absolutely.
the same reason why, folding deuce 7 under the gun doesn't really feel very painful even when the flop is 7-7 deuce, right? It's like, well, it doesn't matter. I made the right decision with the information that I had, and that's really all you can do. So, yeah, I think just gaining peace in that way is just especially beneficial for a professional poker player.
Absolutely. And let's coin a term right now, because I think what you're saying is incredibly important. Let's call this outsourcing. The idea that certain decisions have been outsourced either to your past self or sometimes to your future self, but mostly they have been out. It doesn't matter. They have been outsourced by your work outside of the poker table, either work you've done before or work that you're going to do later, or working with other people, whatever it is. But it has been outsourced. So the idea that 7 deuce is a fold, let's say under the gun, which is a very clear decision, has been outsourced. The idea that, perhaps you create a specific heuristic. I've mentioned that before, X amount of buy-ins. I know Brad and I have a disagreement on that, so this is just my opinion. But let's say that it works for you and you decided that after X amount of buy-ins, you're gonna quit the session. That again has been outsourced by your previous self, and it might be modified again in the future by your future self, but you don't have to think, you don't have to really make a decision at that point, because you have decided when your mind was clear that that is the best decision. And then things like that again can be facilitated by not bringing more cash or credit cards, or however you want to do it. There's a lot of different ways you can actually force to make a decision. But let's use that term. How do you feel of that term, by the way? Is it a good term? Because I know language is very important. And
Sure, you seem to have the strong grasp on the English language, so let's go with outsource. I think that's
I don't know about strong grasp, but I'm trying. Thank you for the compliment. I'll take it.
No, I think outsourcing makes sense. This outsourcing to a past self that has looked at everything more objectively than you can in the heat of the battle, and it's just done, right? You
Right.
just know what to do because this is what you've planned and prepared for, right? In the same way that, like, finding your limits as it relates to session length, right?
Mhm.
I've made the classic mistake of being in a good game and telling myself this game is too good to leave. I cannot leave. And then you play for another 8 hours, and you find yourself at noon the next day just kind of like asking, what in God's earth did I do? You try to go to sleep, your sleep's ruined, you're not
Mhm.
able to play poker for 4 days, and now you have this analysis that you got to kind of do. Was playing in that game an extra 8 hours when I was tired worth losing 4 days of work simply because it screwed up my sleep and just wrecked me for those 4 days, right?
Right.
Typically, the answer is no, it wasn't worth it. I mean, occasionally, maybe, depending on the situation. There are situations that are kind of like unicorns that maybe need to be taken advantage of more than other situations, but generally, um,
Also, you can learn something, and the fact you're learning something is a benefit in on itself.
exactly. So, like, yeah, just basically figuring these things out so that you have processes and systems in place that serve you well, is ultimately just highly beneficial.
Very well said. And speaking of all of these examples and all of these situations, do you have any personal examples of quitting as it pertains to poker or to any other aspects of life that uh, you're proud of?
I have so many examples of quitting. I don't know how many of them I can talk about on the podcast.
Okay, okay, that's fair.
Um,
That's fair. That's fair.
quitting,
No, that I understand. Yes, so that's fair.
yeah, poker. I don't really know that I have many examples of quitting poker that I'm exactly proud of, just because, yeah, I mean, I have always been quite sensitive to when my play is deteriorating and really
Mhm.
how I feel on the inside. I think it's something that have always taken a lot of pride in. So for the most part, um, if I haven't felt like playing, or if I play for an hour and want to quit, then I just quit. So not really anything there, but I mean, as I've gotten older, like asking tough questions about like political affiliation, religious
Mhm.
affiliation,
Mhm.
these sort of things, friendships, relationships.
Right.
There's a lot of those that I've quit, and I'm quite proud of, because ultimately it was me taking responsibility for my own life and my own belief systems, and making choices that resonated with me. So um, those are more of the choices that of quitting things that I'm most proud of.
That's really great. And again, I mean, once again, it goes back to the thing that we discussed earlier. You're giving up important bandwidth and space. You're emptying it up, so for new, interesting things to come and take their place. And again, you can increase uh, the density of experiences and emotions. Right? You get more bang for your buck, so to speak, with the new experiences. So there's only
Yeah,
limited time.
there is the one story that I have about quitting. Um, I was in Horseshoe, or at the Horseshoe Casino. I was probably 21 years old, And I don't know if anybody in the audience has been to Tunica, Mississippi, but there's
I thought
a
I was about to ask if anybody has been 21 years old before.
yeah. um, if you've been to Tunica, you realize there's not much there. And when I was 21, I stayed there for about a month, and I was with two guys. We were sharing a hotel room, or maybe a couple of hotel rooms, and they enjoyed going to the strip club. Like this
Mhm.
was like their favorite thing to do. Um, not me personally, not really my thing, but it was for them. And they went so much, in fact, that one of them came back all pumped, saying that like, oh, one of the girls at the strip club, like we're going on a date, we're gonna go to the casino. Um, so he wrangles up me and the other guy to get ready, go to the casino, hang out, maybe like do some DJing. And that this was back in my minor slot machine issue days. I went to the casino with $6,000 in my pocket, just me, two friends, and the stripper. And we walked past $100 slot machine, and I'm like, oh, yeah, I like this. This is my thing. So I start feeding in the $100 into the slot machine, and within about 35 minutes, I had lost like 5,800.
Mhm.
The stripper actually cried. I lost
Uh,
so much money in the slot machine over such a short period of time. I wanted to cry too, personally. It did not feel good. Um, but I did leave with $200 in my pocket. Actually, that was the end of my Tunica trip. Actually, I drove home and said that I'm quitting slot machines for the rest of my life. And while that wasn't exactly true, I did quit slot machines for a good 13 years or so before at some point realizing like, oh, it's okay to like drop 100 in a $1 slot machine and mess around for fun, for the
sure.
sweat of it, as an enjoyable experience. But yeah, that's one situation in life where I quit something. I was quite proud that I quit, and really just didn't. That scarred me and scared me from the rest of the pits for, yeah, a good decade plus.
And I think it's a powerful story, and the reason why it's a powerful story is because not that there's anything inherently wrong with the slot machines. And I know this comes from a mathematician, but I've said that before. I'm doubling down on one of the podcasts we had about fun and profitability, right? You can have you can have as much fun as you like, but I think the reason why it's such a powerful story is because we said this doesn't feel fun to me, and I'm gonna actually be control of the situation. I think that's the real power there, right? It has nothing to do with like, because up at the point that you didn't quit, before that, or at some point down the line, you were having fun. It was a decision that you made because for the
Oh,
sweat. Yes,
lots
but
of fun.
but at some point it stopped becoming big. It stopped being fun, and then you said, you know what? No, I don't wanna do this anymore. For that reason, I think it's incredibly powerful because you were in control of yourself and your decisions, I think.
Well, I was in control when I was not out of control.
Yeah, yeah, I get it. Yeah, no, but I mean, but we have to be like, the thing is that we're so quick to judge ourselves first and foremost. That's why I'm saying it matters to who you talk to. Like an overachiever like yourself, I mean, immediately you're jumping into judging yourself. And I know I'm very similar. Like my friends are very similar. It's very easy to judge when yourself when you try so hard about things. But the fact of the matter is, we're human. There's certain desires that we have at certain points for whatever reason, and the choices that we make are tied to those desires. And there's nothing wrong, because in the end of the day, aren't we those desires in one way or another? I mean, we want to think that we're more than that, but aren't we like the things that we want and the things that we desire? It's just that at some point we say, listen, if I follow this specific path, I'm going to lose all the other paths. That's the reason why we want to quit on something, because again, it's about the space that we'll create for all the other things. But i
Yeah.
cannot i cannot just judge somebody just for face value that they decided to play the slot machines. The question is, what could they have done otherwise? That's the only question that matters, and that question only you can answer.
Yeah, it reminds me of a very powerful story that we can close on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there was a guy, a performer, who was performing for America's Got Talent Extreme, which is actually here in Atlanta, and they had a mishap where he was basically straight jacketed like 30 feet up and was trying to escape this thing before some bad stuff happened, and he ended up getting like clapped in between two cars. his
Houdini
line,
stuff.
there was an explosion, his line broke, he fell 30 feet onto his head, missed the air mattress down below, and basically now is paralyzed and really very lucky to still be living. And I remember reading about that accident and thinking, holy shit, that is crazy. And then they interviewed him a few months afterwards, and they asked him about, because he has a fiance, right? He had a career that he can't do perform anymore because like he broke his back. I mean, he's in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. Has a fiance. He told his fiance like, now's a free ticket, right? I would totally understand if we ended our relationship. um and the interviewer asked him if he was sad,
Has any
if he woke
regrets?
up sad about what he was missing out on in life now that he had had his accident. And he said, no, I'm not sad, because the reality is, before I had my accident, there were many things that I would never have been able to do. Like, I have to make a choice as to what I prioritize and what I do. And so I woke up ready and excited to do the things that I could do on that day. And these days, it's the exact same. I know that I can't do anything, but there are lots of things that I can do, and I still wake up excited to do the things that I want to do. Right. So again, there's only so much space that we
Space.
have in life. And so, like, be excited about the stuff that you're going to do, because it's not it's finite, right? It's not
Right.
infinite.
Right.
And choose wisely with your available options.
Exactly. And those options are not the same for all people, which is why judging other people makes no sense to begin with,
Sure.
right? Because
Absolutely.
we don't know what the alternative is. We don't know what money means to a certain individual versus others, and we don't know what the alternatives are. How, like, maybe instead of doing that, maybe they would have done something worse to their lives. Who knows? Like, it's very difficult to to,
And
to
on the topic of quitting, I would say, quitting the judgment of self for the things that you do enjoy.
Mhm.
That's something that is quite important, right? Like,
Right.
maybe you love live action role playing, right?
Right.
Or maybe you think
Sure.
you would, but you're too embarrassed to try. You don't want to go for fear of judgment or being
Right.
judged or whatever it is. And I would just say, like, that's a ridiculous reason not to try something that
Absolutely.
may enhance your life and give you a better life experience. And we should be testing and trying many different things on a regular basis so that we can ultimately, live a life that we're proud of, that
Absolutely.
resonates with us.
LARPing included, people. So go LARP, not a problem at all. So
There you go. Send me the videos, and we'll just we'll look at them, and maybe we'll try it out one day.
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's all I got. You got anything else,
No,
Greg?
this is an excellent way to stop. Like, try the things that you like. Again, it all ties up to the idea you're not competing with really anybody but yourself. Like, you are the only one who knows what other available options are out there. So you're the only one who can actually judge yourself, really, because you know what the alternative ideas are. So when you reach to a point where you're judging yourself for something that you do, maybe that's the time you quit. Not because somebody else judges you, but because you judge yourself. You say, listen, I could be using my time or my space, my thing, I could be using it much better because I know I have these other options. If that's your decision, then maybe that's a good time to quit.
For sure, 100%. And if you do notice, you like how I judged the LARPers while saying that they could do what they wanted to do without judgment, right?
Right.
But
We're
I'm
joking.
just
I like nobody, like, I play RPG like all the time. Like, so I'm not going to, like, that's what I'm saying. It's like it's my thing. So I do
yeah.
that too. I haven't tried LARPing yet, but
Well, get in
um,
there at the WSOP, throw some fireballs around, see
there
how
you
it
go.
goes.
There you
Just
go. Exactly. Exactly. What is it, like, the fireball? Is it 3d6? 3d6 plus 6, something like that? Damage? I don't remember. So some of the the listeners can tell us. But anyway, excellent. So Brad, before we nerd it up anymore, where people can find us?
greatnessvillage.com. Hop in the Slack community, Philosophical Friday channel, feedback, questions, answers, things that we didn't touch on, things you would like us to touch on more. All of those things at greatnessvillage.com.
Absolutely.
And that's it.
And also, yeah, people can also find us on Twitter at CPG podcast and at Ask the Math DR, and also on YouTube, Chasing Poker Greatness, where Alex beats Bobby at poker. Feel free to leave comments. Also, we will have a link to the video version of the podcast if you guys are interested. So yeah, pretty much, or Google our names and ask any questions or anything you wanna add to the conversation. We'll be
Good
happy
luck
to.
googling me. There's a lot of high achieving Brad Wilsons in the world, so a lot of bitterness there.
Oh no. So Brad Wilson poker, then there's only one Brad Wilson poker. There's probably, there's also a lot of Brads when it comes to poker, so it has to be Brad Wilson poker.
Yeah, I can't even be the most famous Brad in poker. What a joke.
You probably though, like in a good competition, right? I mean, it would be tough. Who was gonna get the first spot? I think.
I'm pretty sure Owens is crushing me with his giant YouTube audience.
It's close. It depends who you ask, but yeah. Excellent,
all right, man.
sir.
Yeah, great stuff, and we will see you next week.
Absolutely. Take care, man. Always a pleasure.